Hello, today we're looking at when did commemorative stamps start? So, for example, we already know that stamps were kind of introduced in the 1840s, and of course, they were usually of the monarch. But it wasn't until literally 1924 when the stamp changed. They introduced pictures to commemorate, to celebrate an event. So, and Royal Mail have since taken on and introduced lots of different stamps and issues over the years. But the first one was in 1924. Now, a lot of our British monarchs were really interested in stamp collecting or philately, and but the most famous one, not famous, but the most well-known monarch was King George V, who he was really interested in philately and became sort of head of the Philatelic Society in London, has become since the Royal Philatelic Society in London. And he sort of wasn't really keen on the idea of having commemorative stamps simply because he felt it was very un-British. He is not in favour of stamps of this sort because the whole idea is so un-English and is copied from America. The king thinks that it is to be done, it should be done properly. So their first commemorative stamp was in 1924 to mark the British Empire exhibition, and it was a picture of a lion. Now, in those days, printing was actually really quite difficult. You also had to, they only had one block colour, so therefore they had lots of artists designing it, so it wasn't really easy to design a stamp. So, but they sort of introduced it in 1924, and over about 30 years, 24, 34, 40, yeah, over the course of about 30 plus years, there would be like one or two stamp issues a year. And then in the 1960s, that kind of changed because restrictions sort of eased. There were like multicoloured printing was more available, and so they were actually sort of introducing different themes. And it was actually more like David Gentleman, who was an artist, sort of very big in the 1960s. He actually designed the first sort of, I suppose, not the first commemorative issue that we would perhaps recognise today, I suppose. But he was the one who decided to come up with the idea of, rather than having the stamp with a photograph of the Queen and then a little space next to it of a picture, he was the one who said, right, we need to actually have the monarch in a much smaller silhouette in the corner so that the rest of the stamp can have space for a design. And because he was good friends with Tony Benn, the Postmaster General of the time, they sort of started looking at introducing the 400th anniversary of the birth of Shakespeare, the 25th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, the 900th anniversary of the Battle of Hastings. So they had all these ideas of actually we could really celebrate using the stamps. But obviously it was quite difficult because at the time the picture of the Queen took up the majority of the stamp, so the design was really, really small. So that needed to change. So thanks to David Gentleman, he introduced the small silhouette that we have in the corner, which we still use today. It's King Charles now. But anyway, so he introduced that. So from the 1960s, there were about, I don't know, 6 to 10 issues a year. It was kind of more like 8 to 10 issues a year. And then kind of from the 90s, it then became 11. And then from the 2000s, it's gone up to 16, and it's pretty much stayed that way ever since. Interesting, huh?